Hello. It's been a little bit. Not as long as it usually is, thankfully. I'm doing some ink swatching, so I thought I would do a little video on what I do for ink swatching. It's been a while since I've had to do it. I get the Stampin Up re-inkers. I like the little cubes of ink because they're easier to store and take up a lot less space. So I collect Stampin Up inks and use the cubes. So I first measure out 2" by 2" squares because they will fit in the coin pockets that I have, and I'll show you that when I'm done with this. And I'm using the Waffle Flower color swatch stamp set and color swatches for ink pads stamp set. Hold on a second. This is what the color swatches stamp set looks like. Now I cut 4 of them apart from the rest of this block here. You can still use it together, but it just makes it easier to get the 4 little areas that I need for what I'm going to do. So the first thing I like to do is have a block of color at the top of the swatch so that I can place the colors next to each other like this and see how they look together. If you have a little strip of white or something between the 2 colors, then the white, or whatever color it is, will offset the look of the color. It'll make it look brighter or darker depending on what it is that you're using. I'm using my stamperatus from Stampin Up, but I've got the Altenew, what is it called? Stamp Wheel Ultra Sticky Matte Grid. I've not used it to stamp a whole lot, so I don't know how well it's going to work, but I may get the actual stamp wheel at some point. I don't know. I like the fact that you can flip it over and you only have to worry about the footprint of the actual platform, where this you have to make sure that you have room for where the door goes. For this, it's not that big of a problem, and of course my desk is cleaner than it's been in months, but it's still a mess because I'm doing this. But if it's were any more messy than it is, then it would be difficult to get the ink on the stamp to stamp it down. One thing I do like about this sticky mat from Altenew is I can just use another piece of paper to line up the paper that I'm stamping, and it makes it a lot easier to switch out. Before, I just used masking tape to mask, and over time the tape would peel up, and so my stamps weren't always getting where it needed to go. Now I'm going to use the color swatch for ink pad stamps, and I'm using the large one. I'm going to fill in, sorry, the stamp is wanting to stick to the stamp pad, fill in the 1 block here, because what I'm doing is creating a guide for the different ways that the ink might look depending on how I use it. So here I'm going to do 1st, 2nd, and 3rd generation stamping to see how the ink lightens up depending on the number of times I stamp it without re-inking. And then over here is 1st generation, and then double stamping, and then triple stamping. because the more color you put down, the more it may affect the color of the ink. Here is, let's see, is that the best example of what I've got sitting out? Yeah, probably. Here you can see that 1 stamp, 2 stamp, and 3 stamp gives a slightly different look. It gradually gets a little bit darker each time. So now that we've got the generational and double stamping done, I'm going to put out a bit of ink and do a little water blending so I can see how the color blends out with water. And then I'm going to use a blender pen and you can see how that eventually gives kind of an ombre look there. Now, the cardstock that I'm using isn't watercolor paper, but I figure it's going to give an approximation, and that's all I really need is to see how much it'll bleed out. Now I'm just going to wipe down my stamps to use for the next. Oh, this is the last color that I have to do with these. And now just to label my swatch. Something else about this sticky mat, it's basically just a large photopolymer stamp, and then on one side they've got grid lines in it, and the other side is flat. But it holds your paper down pretty nicely, so you don't have to hold it to write on it. And there we have it. There's my ink swatch. Now I've got a 3-ring binder that I put my ink swatches in. And as you can see, I've got tons and tons of colors. And I've got them all organized by color. And what I like to do is, this is one reason that I want the colors at the top, because it allows me, I'm hoping I can get this in frame because the binder's kind of big, and hopefully the glare isn't too bad. But this allows me to see where this color fits in. And those are more red there. Thinking it can fit down here because it kind of matches in with that color there. I've got various brands of ink cubes, so being able to see, this copper clay has a bit of a red tint to it, but it's still very brown. So there's that. I removed a whole bunch. I decided not to have my Tim Holtz oxides in with these. Okay, this is a little more green. Let's see here. I've got this pebbled path that might fit in. Okay, it looks like it goes. It's a very warm brown, or not brown, but gray. Though it has a bit of a brown tinge to it, but I think I can pop it in there. The benefit of having the colors laid out like this is layered stamping, so that I can see what colors go together to create the image. An example, these are stencils, but I got a whole bunch of Altenew stencils, and each color is a different stencil that you layer down and brush your ink through. And having the ink colors laid out like this makes it easier to see what colors might go together and not be too jarring or too unrealistic. Something else to consider with the layering is allowing the ink to dry. When I first stenciled that, it was very gaudy isn't quite the word I'm looking for, but the ink drying down and blending into each other a bit really helped this. It looks pretty now. It wasn't pretty when I first did it. So letting things like that do that, it's helpful. I used Distress Oxides on those, so that probably makes a bit of a difference too. Okay, so we'll go next to the blues here. Oh, that's very close to that. Just going through and seeing what other blues this might... Yeah, that's starting to get into... It's a little bit more blue than Storm Cloud, so I'm thinking it kind of goes between the Faded Jeans and the Storm Cloud. It's a very slight difference. I think the size of the ink nib that I used on that was a little different than the other ones that I've used. Oh well. Okay, so now this color is kind of one of those in-between colors. It's kind of green, almost like an olivey green. They call it wild wheat. Let's see here. Seeing if it'll go matching with my... No, it's really not fitting in with the greens. It can, but it doesn't match any of my other greens. Let's see. And I don't think that it's going to look... Yeah, no, because that's just getting more orange and yellow. So I think I'm going to put this next to Crushed Olive. It's kind of a too green to be yellow, but too yellow to be a real green. And it's not really a brown either, so... Actually, let's go back and make sure that it can't be a... Kind of like this Olive Grove, it's a green-gray, and so it's one of those kind of weird colors too. Okay, let's get back here to the browns. Yeah, it definitely doesn't go with any of those. I was thinking maybe it might... Yeah, it definitely doesn't go with any of those. It almost could go with these if I had any of these that were a lot darker, but I don't think that's going to work. So it'll end up with the greens. And actually, I want to look at that copper color again and see if... Yeah, it looks really good with the browns here, but I'm wondering if I've got some rusty looking reds too, so could almost go with the orange. I'm sorry if you can't see that very well. Okay, yeah, that's definitely getting into the pink, so just looking to see where Rusty Hinge is in here. Do I have it in here? This is a bit disturbing. I'm not seeing it. And it's kind of a... yeah, it's definitely not that way. Uh-oh. That's a bit of a problem. Yeah, I think it's definitely more brown, because all the colors that I have are definitely more, up here are definitely more orange, so that's going to annoy me that I can't figure out what I did with the Rusty Hinge color that I had. Not unless I inadvertently... no, that's definitely oxide, and I don't have anything else. Huh. I don't know, I'm overlooking it somehow. Okay, enough. I need to move on. Okay, so here is Moody Mauve. It's very close to the Sweet Sugar Plum, but just slightly more purple, so I'm thinking that's where it needs to go. These colors kind of goes with these, but these are more purple. So, let's see here. Okay, I'm going to have to move some swatches now to get this to fit in. The joys of ink swatching. Thankfully I've got space in here to move these around. Usually I'd have to go through the whole thing, but when I took the oxides out, it left some empty spaces, so that made things much easier to move these around this time. Okay, there we go. That's that there. Now to get this side, I'm thinking, yeah, it goes between those two, I think. Kind of surprised that they released a color that's so similar to something else that they already had. When it comes to inks, it's kind of hard to tell what they look like next to each other unless you actually have them and are able to see them next to each other. Because sometimes there's just little slight differences that you can't really tell on a screen that you can in person. But anyway, this is my ink swatches. I've got, these are all my oxides here. And you can tell how over time the colors will shift as they oxidize. And then I've got my neon colors, and then these get into my dye inks, which is what I have the most of. And then I have the VersaFine pigment inks and the archival inks. And then these are some other pigment inks that I have, and some ombre. This is how I used to swatch my inks, but I prefer this because I can see all the different ways that the ink will look under various circumstances. So, then I've also got my embossing powders in here as well. So, that's what I do with swatching. Hopefully, what I've shown is helpful to somebody and gives you some ideas of what to consider when you do ink swatches to get the most out of your swatching. And the swatches are kind of a reference guide for your inks, and it's helpful to have the various ways that you use the product shown so that you get a better idea when you go looking for a color, how it's going to look. Some colors, if you add water to them, change completely, and then you're back to having to find something to work for what you're looking for. And having the swatch of it makes it easier to know that that's what you're going to expect with that medium, and to rely on something else instead to get what you need out of the color. So, enough rambling. I hope everyone had a good holiday season and a happy new year, and until next time, bye.